For more than 3 millennia, from approximately 3100 year BCE to 30 year BCE, ancient Egypt maintained a continuous political and religious system centered on the institution of the pharaoh. This extended period of stability and cultural coherence is unparalleled in human history. The durability of this system was not the result of frequent conquest or sudden change. Instead, it was founded on a combination of environmental stability, ideological consistency, and flexible governance that adapted to shifting internal and external conditions while preserving essential traditions. The geographical setting of Egypt was a fundamental factor in this longevity. The Nile River, flowing from south to north through the desert, created a narrow strip of fertile land where agriculture could flourish each year. The Nile's predictable flooding deposited rich silt across its banks, replenishing the soil and enabling food production to support growing populations. This natural rhythm provided a stable economic base and a framework around which social and political structures could be organized. Yet, geography alone cannot explain the endurance of pharaonic Egypt. The key lay in the institution of kingship itself and the set of religious and ideological principles that supported it. The pharaoh was understood as the guarantor of Maat, the concept of cosmic order, balance, and justice. This principle was central to Egyptian thought and governance. The pharaoh's role was to maintain Maat by upholding laws, conducting religious rituals, defending the land, and overseeing economic activity. Pharaonic authority was expressed through both tangible and symbolic means. Monumental architecture such as temples and pyramids served not only religious functions but also reinforced the permanence and power of the king. Hieroglyphic inscriptions and art conveyed the pharaoh's role in maintaining harmony between the gods, the natural world, and society. This visual and ritual language was consistent throughout the centuries, allowing even periods of political fragmentation to be understood within the same overarching ideological framework. Moreover, the administration of Egypt was highly organized and bureaucratic. Officials such as viziers, scribes, and regional governors operated within a hierarchical system that managed taxation, labor, justice, and infrastructure. While the pharaoh was the supreme authority, the practical governance of the state relied on this complex network of administrators. This structure allowed Egypt to manage resources effectively and maintain social order across diverse regions. The endurance of pharaonic rule was also marked by its capacity to adapt. Throughout its history, Egypt faced challenges including climate fluctuations, internal dissent, foreign invasions, and shifts in economic conditions. Rather than collapsing under such pressures, the system was able to absorb changes, reorganize, and continue functioning. Dynastic changes, new religious ideas, and periods of decentralization all occurred within a framework that preserved core values and institutions. For example, during the first intermediate period, central authority weakened and regional rulers gained power. Nevertheless, the idea of the pharaoh as a unifying figure remained. Later, during the New Kingdom, pharaohs expanded Egypt's borders through military campaigns, demonstrating the system's ability to project power outward while maintaining internal coherence. The conclusion of pharaonic rule came only after foreign powers such as the Persians, Greeks, and Romans absorbed Egypt into larger empires. The Roman annexation in 30 year BCE marked the end of native pharaohs as imperial rule replaced the ancient system. However, the legacy of Egypt's 3,000 years of pharaonic governance continued to influence culture, religion, and administration long after. In summary, Egypt's remarkable historical continuity arose from the interplay of stable environmental conditions, a resilient and deeply embedded ideological system centered on the pharaoh and Maat, and an adaptable but enduring administrative framework. This combination allowed the civilization to maintain its identity and structure over millennia, surviving internal upheaval and external challenges alike. Before the rise of the pharaohs and the political unification of Egypt, the land along the Nile River was home to a variety of small communities and cultures. This period, often called the pre-dynastic era, spanned several millennia before approximately 3,100 year BCE. Understanding the geography, environment, and social developments of this time is essential to explaining how a centralized system of rule emerged and endured. The Nile River was the defining feature of the region, flowing northward from the mountains of East Africa into the Mediterranean Sea. The Nile created a narrow but fertile strip of land surrounded by vast deserts. This geography limited settlement to the river valley and delta, concentrating populations in a linear pattern. The Nile's annual flooding was predictable and vital to agricultural productivity. Each year, floodwaters overflowed the banks, depositing layers of nutrient-rich silt. This natural process replenished the soil, enabling farmers to grow crops reliably in an otherwise arid environment. Early inhabitants of the Nile Valley capitalized on these conditions by developing agricultural techniques suited to the environment. They cultivated crops such as emmer wheat and barley and raised domesticated animals. Settlements grew from simple camps to larger villages with permanent structures. Archaeological sites such as Nabta Playa and Hierapolis provide evidence of increasing social complexity during this time. The Nile's flood cycle required early communities to coordinate activities related to planting, harvesting, and irrigation. This need for cooperation contributed to the emergence of social organization. Beyond kinship groups, leadership roles began to develop, often tied to managing resources and labor. Individuals who could organize collective work or control access to fertile land gained influence. Distinct cultural regions formed in Upper Egypt, located in the southern part of the Nile Valley, and Lower Egypt in the northern Nile Delta. Each region developed its own artistic styles, burial customs, and pottery designs. These regional identities persisted for centuries but also show signs of interaction and exchange. Trade networks extended beyond the Nile Valley to neighboring areas such as Nubia to the south and the Levant to the northeast. Social stratification gradually became apparent during the pre-dynastic period. Graves from this era indicate differences in wealth and status, with some individuals buried with goods such as pottery, jewelry, and tools, while others had simpler intimates. This differentiation suggests the rise of elites who controlled resources and held political power. At local levels, the development of early political structures is visible through the construction of ceremonial centers and fortifications at sites like Abydos and Hierapolis. These sites served as centers for religious, economic, and political activities. The presence of large-scale architecture indicates the ability to mobilize and manage labor forces, a hallmark of emerging state-level organization. The increase in complexity over time set the stage for the eventual unification of Upper and Lower Egypt around 3100 Year BCE. This process culminated in the consolidation of power under a single ruler. Traditionally identified as Narmer or Menes, this unification marked the beginning of the early dynastic period and the establishment of the pharaoh as authority. Throughout the pre-dynastic era, environmental conditions remained relatively stable, supporting agricultural productivity and population growth. However, challenges such as fluctuations in Nile flood levels and climatic shifts required adaptability. From these early communities, their responses laid the groundwork for the institutional structures that would characterize pharaonic Egypt. In summary, the geography of the Nile Valley, the predictable flooding cycle, and the gradual emergence of agricultural and social complexity during the pre-dynastic period created the conditions necessary for centralized rule. Local leadership developed in response to economic and environmental needs. Social stratification increased, and cultural identities formed. These factors combined to make the institution of the pharaoh both practical and necessary in the centuries that followed. Around 3100 Year BCE, the region known today as Egypt experienced a significant political transformation. What had been a collection of distinct cultural and territorial regions, Upper Egypt in the south and Lower Egypt in the north, was unified into a single political entity. This unification marked the beginning of the early dynastic period and established the foundation for the pharaonic system of governance that would endure for over 3,000 years. The process of unification was gradual, occurring over several centuries, involving increasing political, economic, and cultural integration. Archaeological evidence shows the emergence of increasingly complex societies in both Upper and Lower Egypt. These societies developed centralized leadership structures, improved agricultural productivity, and expanded trade networks at this point in history. The consolidation of these territories under a single ruler was not only a political act, but also a religious and ideological milestone. The ruler credited with achieving this unification is often identified as Narmer, sometimes referred to as Menes in ancient Egyptian tradition. While the historicity of Menes as an individual remains debated, the Narmer palette, an important archaeological artifact, provides clear evidence of a king exerting authority over both Upper and Lower Egypt. The palette depicts Narmer wearing the crown of Upper Egypt on one side and the crown of Lower Egypt on the other, symbolizing his rule over the two lands. Unification meant the establishment of centralized political authority, which had immediate and long-term implications. The ruler, now known as the pharaoh, was recognized as the supreme leader, combining political, religious, and military roles. This central authority enabled the coordination of resources and labor on a scale previously unseen in the region. Large construction projects, such as the building of temples and royal tombs, became possible. The creation of administrative offices and bureaucracies supported governance and control over distant regions. This consolidation of power also had a religious dimension. The pharaoh was seen as the earthly representative of the gods, charged with maintaining the divine order and harmony of the universe. The symbolic unification of Upper and Lower Egypt was reflected in royal regalia, ceremonies, and iconography, reinforcing the pharaoh's role as a unifier and guardian of cosmic balance. The early dynastic kings established Memphis as a political and administrative center near the boundary between Upper and Lower Egypt. Memphis functioned as a hub for governance, economic activity, and religious practice. The city's strategic location facilitated control over the entire Nile Valley. In addition to political centralization, the unification stimulated advances in technology, art, and culture. Hieroglyphic writing began to develop during this period, allowing for record keeping, administration, and communication. Artistic styles that combined elements from both regions emerged, reflecting the integration of diverse traditions. The early dynastic period witnessed the construction of monumental tombs for the pharaohs and elites. These tombs foreshadowed the architectural achievements of the Old Kingdom. Where pyramid building would reach its zenith, burial practices and funerary rituals were refined to emphasize the pharaoh as divine status and the importance of the afterlife, despite the establishment of a centralized state. Regional identities and local traditions persisted. Governors and local officials administered their territories while owing allegiance to the pharaoh. This balance between central authority and local governance became a defining feature of the pharaonic system. The consolidation of Upper and Lower Egypt under a single ruler laid the foundation for Egypt as political stability and cultural unity. This unification created a model of kingship that combines secular power with religious significance, reinforcing the pharaoh's role as a central figure in Egyptian society. The achievements of the first pharaohs set precedents that would influence subsequent dynasties. Their ability to harness the Nile's resources, manage labor, and symbolize unity through religious and political means contributed to the longevity of the pharaonic institution. Throughout the early dynastic period, the pharaoh's authority was expressed through inscriptions, statues, and ceremonial objects that conveyed messages of power, legitimacy, and divine sanction. These forms of communication ensured that the pharaoh's presence was felt across the kingdom, from the capital to the most distant regions. The unification of Egypt was a turning point that shaped the course of Egyptian history. It established the political framework and ideological principles that would guide the civilization through periods of prosperity and challenge. Understanding this event is essential to comprehending the nature of pharaonic rule and the endurance of ancient Egypt. The institution of the pharaoh was central to ancient Egyptian civilization, embodying both political authority and religious significance. Understanding what a pharaoh really was requires an examination of the complex and enduring system. of beliefs that defined kingship, as well as the practical functions the pharaoh fulfilled within society. Pharaonic power was closely linked to the ancient Egyptian religious framework. Central to this framework were the gods Horus, Osiris, and the concept of Mat, which together shaped the identity and role of the pharaoh across all periods of Egyptian history. Horus, often depicted as a falcon or a man with a falcon's head, was the god of kingship and the sky. The pharaoh was seen as the living embodiment of Horus on earth. This association established the pharaoh's divine right to rule, connecting him directly to the gods and legitimizing his authority. Each new pharaoh was considered the successor of Horus, inheriting a responsibility to maintain order and harmony in the land. Osiris, another principal deity, represented death, resurrection, and the afterlife, while Horus embodied the living king. Osiris symbolized the eternal nature of kingship through his role as the god of the dead and judge. Of souls, the pharaoh, upon death, was believed to join Osiris in the afterlife, ensuring the continuation of divine kingship beyond mortality. That was the concept of cosmic order, truth, justice, and balance. It was the principle that governed the universe, society, and morality. The pharaoh's primary duty was to uphold Mat by maintaining harmony between humans, nature, and the gods' failure to preserve Mat was thought to result in chaos and disorder. Kingship was thus understood not merely as political rule, but as a sacred office with religious obligations. The pharaoh was responsible for performing rituals and ceremonies designed to sustain Mat. These rituals included offerings to the gods, temple building, and participation in festivals. The pharaoh's role was to ensure that the natural and social worlds functioned according to divine law. Pharaonic power was symbolized through specific regalia and iconography. The crowns of Upper and Lower Egypt, the crook and flail, and the false beard were among the visual markers of kingship. The double crown, combining the white crown of Upper Egypt and the red crown of Lower Egypt, represented the unification of the two lands under the pharaoh's rule. Royal titulary, a formal set of 5 names, further expressed the pharaoh's divine and political roles. These names included the Horus name, the throne name, and others that emphasized the king, his relationship with the gods, and his role as protector of Egypt. The pharaoh's authority extended into governance, military leadership, and law. While considered divine, the pharaoh also functioned as the highest earthly authority. Administrative officials, including viziers and nomarchs, executed the pharaoh's decrees and managed daily affairs of the state. Pharaohs were often depicted in art and inscriptions engaging in activities that reinforced their sacred role, such as smiting enemies or making offerings to deities. These images conveyed the pharaoh's power and duty to protect Egypt from chaos, both external and internal. The concept of kingship remained remarkably consistent throughout Egypt's long history, despite changes in dynasty, foreign invasions, and social transformations. This continuity was essential to maintaining the cultural and political stability that characterized ancient Egypt at the same time. There were adaptations and variations in how pharaonic power was expressed. Different periods emphasized certain aspects of kingship, such as the New Kingdom's focus on imperial authority or Akhenaten's temporary religious reforms. However, the foundational principles connected to Horus, Osiris, and Mat persisted. In sum, the pharaoh was both a divine figure and a practical ruler. His identity was defined by religious ideology that connected him to the gods and established his role as guardian of cosmic order. His political authority was exercised through a structured administration that sustained the state. This dual nature of pharaonic kingship underpinned the resilience and longevity of ancient Egypt's political and religious system. The governance of ancient Egypt under the pharaoh was a carefully organized system that balanced the centralized authority of the king with local administration spread across the country. This vast and varied landscape, the pharaoh held supreme political, religious, and military power. Yet the day-to-day management of Egypt's extensive territory, diverse population, and abundant resources required a complex bureaucracy staffed by skilled officials, trained scribes, and local leaders. This administration ensured the effective implementation of royal policies, the management of economic resources, the maintenance of law and order, and the cohesion of Egyptian society. At the pinnacle of this bureaucratic hierarchy, directly beneath the pharaoh, stood the vizier. The vizier was the highest-ranking official and the pharaoh's chief advisor, functioning as the kingdom's prime minister or chief executive officer. This position held immense responsibility and authority, acting as the essential link between the pharaoh and the government apparatus. The vizier coordinated the activities of various government departments and oversaw the execution of the king's decrees, managing state affairs with careful attention to detail and administrative efficiency. The vizier's duties were broad and comprehensive. They included supervising taxation to ensure a steady flow of resources to the royal treasury, overseeing the judiciary to uphold justice according to Egyptian law, managing public works such as the construction of temples, canals, and monuments, and supervising agricultural production vital to the sustenance and wealth of Egypt. The vizier needed a deep understanding of legal codes, economic management, and statecraft to fulfill these functions effectively. To aid in governance, the vizier was supported by a council of officials specializing in different areas of administration. One essential component of the administration was the tax system. Taxation in ancient Egypt was multifaceted, often paid in the form of grain, livestock, labor, and manufactured goods rather than currency. Taxes supported the royal court, funded public construction projects, and maintained the military. Local tax collectors and officials assessed the amount owed by farmers, artisans, and merchants based on land holdings, production levels, and trade activities. These collectors worked closely with scribes who maintained meticulous records of payments and obligations. Scribes held a crucial role in the governance of Egypt, educated in specialized schools. Scribes were trained in reading and writing hieroglyphics and later hieratic script, the skills made them indispensable to the administration as they recorded economic transactions, census data, tax records, legal rulings, and religious texts. Scribes acted as the government's communicators and record keepers, enabling a complex bureaucracy to function efficiently by providing accurate and timely information. Their work was essential in linking the central government to provincial and local authorities. Egypt was divided into administrative districts called nomes, each governed by a nomarch. The nomarch was responsible for the local administration, tax collection, justice, and maintenance of order within their district. Nomarchs reported to the vizier, and thus to the pharaoh, serving as the pharaoh's representatives in the provinces. Their cooperation was vital to sustaining the centralized authority of the pharaoh throughout the kingdom. The power and influence of nomarchs could vary over time, sometimes becoming quite significant, particularly during periods of weak central control. Law and justice were key pillars of Egyptian governance. The pharaoh was considered the supreme lawgiver, embodying the principle of cosmic order and justice. Courts administered justice according to established laws, handling matters of property, contracts, family disputes, and criminal offenses. Judges, often appointed by the government or local authorities, presided over trials and legal decisions. These courts ensured that laws were respected and social order preserved. Legal rulings were recorded by scribes, creating archives that served as precedents and references for future cases. Labor was a critical resource in the ancient Egyptian state. The pharaoh could mobilize large groups of workers for public projects, including the construction of temples, pyramids, canals, and fortifications. Much of this labor was corvée compulsory work owed by citizens to the state as a form of tax. Seasonal agricultural cycles and religious festivals influenced the timing and organization of labor forces. Overseers managed these laborers, organizing teams with specific tasks and ensuring that projects proceeded efficiently. The coordination of labor was essential not only for monumental architecture, but also for maintaining irrigation systems that sustained agriculture. Communication was maintained throughout Egypt by an organized system of messengers and written correspondence. Royal decrees, orders, and reports were transmitted between the pharaoh, the vizier, local officials, and nomarchs to ensure consistent governance across the kingdom. This system allowed the central government to respond to local issues, mobilize resources, and enforce laws. The use of writing and record-keeping was fundamental to the administration's ability to maintain control over Egypt's extensive territories. Egypt's economy was supported by trade and resource management overseen by officials who managed import and export activities. Egypt imported valuable goods such as cedar wood from Lebanon, gold from Nubia, and incense from Punt. Officials arranged expeditions to acquire these materials, strengthening the economy and the pharaoh's prestige. Trade routes connected Egypt with neighboring regions, facilitating the exchange of goods, ideas, and cultural influences. These activities contributed to the wealth and stability of the state. Religious institutions played an integral role in the administration of Egypt. Temples were not only centers of worship but also economic hubs, employing priests, craftsmen, and laborers. Temple estates controlled large tracts of agricultural land that produced surplus goods, contributing to the state's resources. The pharaoh supported temple construction and religious rituals, reinforcing his role as the intermediary between the gods and the people. The administration of temple lands and personnel was a significant aspect of governance, requiring coordination between religious and state authorities. The governance system of ancient Egypt required a balance between the pharaoh's absolute authority and the delegation of responsibilities to officials and local leaders. While the pharaoh was the ultimate source of power, effective rule depended on the cooperation and competence of administrators throughout the kingdom. This structure allowed Egypt to maintain political stability, manage its resources, and respond to challenges over millennia during the Old Kingdom. The administration developed the systems that matured in later periods. These systems adapted to changing political and social circumstances while preserving the fundamental principles of centralized authority supported by a network of bureaucrats. Even during periods of political fragmentation, such as the intermediate periods, the administrative framework provided continuity and resilience. The success of Egypt's governance is evident in its ability to mobilize resources for monumental architecture, sustain agricultural productivity, enforce laws, and maintain social order. These functions contributed significantly to the longevity of the pharaonic state, allowing it to endure for over 3,000 years. Understanding how pharaohs governed Egypt on a daily basis provides insight into the practical mechanisms that underpinned ancient Egyptian civilization. It reveals a sophisticated system of management that combined religious legitimacy with administrative efficiency. This system was fundamental to the enduring legacy of pharaonic Egypt. The Old Kingdom marks a defining era in ancient Egyptian history, spanning from approximately 2686 year BCE to 2181 year BCE. This period established the foundations of pharaonic statehood through the consolidation of centralized authority and monumental architecture. The pharaohs of the Old Kingdom ruled as divine kings, exercising political, religious, and economic control, with their powers symbolized and perpetuated by stone. The Old Kingdom is sometimes called the Age of the Pyramids, a reference to the extraordinary architectural achievements of this era. The construction of pyramids as royal tombs reflected the pharaohs' desire to assert their authority, secure their afterlife, and express their role as intermediaries between the gods and the people. These massive stone structures remain some of the most recognizable symbols of ancient Egypt, illustrating the state's ability to mobilize resources, organize labor, and apply technical knowledge on a grand scale. The early Old Kingdom began with the Third Dynasty, marked by the reign of King Djoser, who commissioned the Step Pyramid at Saqqara. Designed by the architect Imhotep, this pyramid was the first large-scale stone building in Egyptian history. Its innovative design, comprising a series of 6-step mastabas stacked upon each other, represent at a significant departure from earlier mud brick tombs. The step pyramid was intended as a royal burial place and a symbol of the pharaoh's eternal presence. It also served religious functions, reinforcing the king's connection to the divine. Following Djoser, the Fourth Dynasty produced some of Egypt's most famous pharaohs, including Snefru, Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure. Snefru initiated a series of experiments in pyramid construction, culminating in the Bent Pyramid and the Red Pyramid. both located at Dasha. These efforts refined architectural techniques that culminated in the Great Pyramid of Giza, built by Khufu around 2560 Year BCE. The Great Pyramid stands as the largest and most precisely engineered pyramid, consisting of an estimated 0.3 million limestone blocks arranged with remarkable accuracy. The pyramid served not only as tombs but as political statements. Their scale and durability projected the pharaoh's power beyond his lifetime, manifesting divine authority in stone adjacent to the pyramids. Mortuary temples were constructed to facilitate ongoing rituals that maintained the pharaohs, spiritual well-being, and, by extension, the stability of the state. These temples were centers of religious activity and economic management, staffed by priests who conducted daily offerings. The Old Kingdom pharaohs also oversaw the development of an extensive bureaucratic system that managed resources, labor, and taxation. This system relied on the Nile's seasonal flooding, which deposited fertile silt on the land, enabling agricultural surpluses that supported both the population and the state's projects. Centralized control ensured the collection and redistribution of grain and goods, financing the workforce needed for construction and administration. Labor for pyramid building and other state projects was organized through a corvée system, where peasants provided work during the agricultural off-season. This labor was coordinated by officials who oversaw food supply, worker housing, tools, and security. Contrary to earlier assumptions, recent archaeological evidence suggests that pyramid builders were not slaves, but skilled workers compensated with food, shelter, and medical care. These workers lived in nearby villages with infrastructure such as bakeries, breweries, and workshops. The Old Kingdom also experienced the codification of laws and administration of justice, which reinforced the pharaoh's role as the guarantor of order, truth, and justice. Legal officials were appointed to enforce laws, adjudicate disputes, and maintain social stability. Courts operated at various levels, from local to royal, ensuring that the king's authority extended throughout the realm. Pharaohs during this period undertook military campaigns primarily aimed at securing borders and controlling trade routes rather than expansive conquest. The Old Kingdom's foreign relations focused on expeditions to acquire resources like copper, gold, and precious stones. These goods were essential for both economic prosperity and religious purposes, used in temple offerings and royal regalia. Throughout the Old Kingdom, art and culture flourished in connection with religious and political life. Some paintings and sculptures depicted daily life, religious ceremonies, and the pharaoh's divine status. These works adhered to strict conventions, reinforcing hierarchical order and eternal ideals. The coherence of style and symbolism reflected the stability and unity of the pharaonic system. By the end of the Old Kingdom, the central authority began to weaken due to factors including economic difficulties, climatic changes that affected Nile floods, and rising power of provincial nomarchs. This weakening led to the First Intermediate Period, a time of political fragmentation that followed the end of the Old Kingdom. Nevertheless, the Old Kingdom's achievements in state formation, administration, and monumental architecture set enduring standards for later Egyptian civilizations. Its legacy persisted in subsequent kingdoms and remains foundational to understanding pharaonic Egypt's development. Segment 7. Fragmentation, the Intermediate Period c. 2181 Year BCE, 2055 Year BCE, and later parallels the period following the Old Kingdom, beginning around 1181 Year BCE, is marked by political fragmentation and decentralization, known collectively as the First Intermediate Period. This era reflects a significant shift in the structure of ancient Egyptian governance, characterized by weakened central authority and increased regional autonomy. Despite these changes, cultural and religious traditions persisted, demonstrating the resilience of the pharaonic system amid political discontinuity. The First Intermediate Period spans approximately from 2181 Year BCE to 2055 Year BCE. It followed the collapse of the Old Kingdom's centralized government, which had been strained by economic difficulties, a series of low Nile floods, and the increasing power of provincial nomarchs, local rulers of the nomes. Egypt's territorial divisions. This period saw the decline of the pharaoh's direct control, as nomarchs exercised more independent authority within their regions. The breakdown of centralized power did not entail a collapse of Egyptian civilization. Instead, the political landscape became more fragmented, with multiple centers of power emerging. Rival dynasties ruled concurrently in different parts of Egypt. The Heracleopolitan kings controlled Lower Egypt, while the Theban rulers governed Upper Egypt. These divisions were accompanied by intermittent conflict and competition for legitimacy, reflected in inscriptions and archaeological evidence. The administrative system adapted to these circumstances by emphasizing local governance, nomarchs managed taxation, justice, and public works within their nomes. This shift allowed local elites to consolidate resources and authority, often through hereditary succession. The decentralization was not uniform. Some regions maintained stronger ties to the former central government, while others acted with greater autonomy, despite political fragmentation. Cultural practices and religious beliefs remained remarkably continuous. Artistic styles evolved, but religious concepts such as mapped order and balance continued to underpin society. Local temples remained centers of religious life and economic activity, preserving traditional rituals and maintaining the connection between the community and the divine. Literacy and scribal culture persisted, as evidenced by texts such as the coffin texts, funerary writings that expanded upon the earlier pyramid texts of the Old Kingdom. These texts provided guidance for the afterlife and reflect ongoing theological development, demonstrating continuity in religious thought even during times of political division. The first intermediate period ended with the reunification of Egypt under the 11th dynasty, based in Thebes, around 2055 Year BCE. The Theban king Mentuhotep II defeated rival factions and restored centralized rule, initiating the Middle Kingdom. This reunification was gradual and involved both military conquest and political negotiation. The phenomenon of intermediate periods was not unique to this phase of Egyptian history. Later times of decentralization and political fragmentation, known as the Second and Third Intermediate Periods, occurred during the Late Bronze Age and the Late Period, respectively. These episodes also featured divided rule, competing dynasties, and regional autonomy, yet the pharaonic institution endured in each case. In the Second Intermediate Period, see 1650 Year BCE minus 1550 Year BCE. Foreign groups such as the Hyksos established control in parts of Lower Egypt. This period saw a complex interplay between native Egyptian rulers in Upper Egypt and foreign rulers in the north. The eventual expulsion of the Hyksos led to the rise of the New Kingdom. The Third Intermediate Period, c. 1070 Year BCE, 664 Year BCE, was marked by the division of power among Libyan and Nubian rulers, priestly authorities, and competing dynasties. Yet, like earlier intermediate periods, Egyptian religious and cultural traditions persisted, adapting to new political realities. The resilience of Egyptian civilization through these periods of fragmentation highlights the adaptability of its institutions, the concept of kingship, religious ideology, and social order were maintained even as political power fluctuated. Local rulers, priests, and scribes preserved administrative structures and cultural practices that allowed the pharaonic system to reassert itself when conditions allowed. The intermediate periods illustrate how Egyptian history was not a linear progression, but included cycles of unity and division. These cycles influenced the development of governance, culture, and religious expression, contributing to the complexity of Egypt's long history. Understanding the intermediate periods provides insight into the mechanisms of political change and continuity in ancient Egypt. They reveal how local power bases could rise in times of central weakness and how cultural and religious institutions offered stability amid political upheaval. This period of fragmentation thus serves as a bridge between the Old Kingdom as centralized authority and the Middle Kingdom as renewed consolidation. It underscores the enduring nature of Egyptian civilization, which could withstand political challenges while preserving core elements of its identity. The period known as the Middle Kingdom marks a significant phase in ancient Egyptian history, characterized by political reunification, administrative reform, and cultural development. Beginning around 2055 Year BCE. This era followed the fragmentation of the first intermediate period and represents the restoration of centralized authority anchored in Thebes, located in Upper Egypt. The reunification was initiated under the rule of Mentuhotep II, the Theban king who successfully consolidated power by defeating rival dynasties in Lower Egypt. This political achievement laid the foundation for the 11th dynasty and the start of the Middle Kingdom. The reunification process was gradual, involving both military campaigns and strategic alliances, which stabilized Egypt after decades of division, central to the Middle Kingdom. This governance was the reinforcement of the pharaoh's role as a unifying figure. Pharaohs during this period emphasized their responsibility to uphold order, justice, and balance through effective administration and social welfare. This renewed ideological framework served to legitimize the monarch's authority and to restore confidence in the central government. Administrative reforms played a crucial role in consolidating power. The Middle Kingdom saw the reorganization of Egypt's territorial divisions, with nomes more clearly defined and supervised. The office of the vizier remained pivotal, overseeing taxation, law enforcement, and the implementation of royal decrees. The bureaucratic apparatus expanded, including an increased number of scribes and officials to manage state affairs efficiently. Economic management improved through the development of agricultural infrastructure. Including irrigation projects and land reclamation, these efforts were necessary to support a growing population and to ensure a stable food supply. State-sponsored mining expeditions and trade missions expanded Egypt's access to valuable resources such as gold, copper, and exotic goods, strengthening the kingdom's economy. Literary and artistic production flourished during the Middle Kingdom, reflecting the era's intellectual vitality. Royal inscriptions and official texts emphasized the pharaoh's role as a shepherd of his people, a theme that highlighted social responsibility and benevolent rulership. Funerary literature, including the coffin texts, became more elaborate, indicating developments in religious thought and beliefs about the afterlife. Architectural achievements in this period include the construction of temples, fortresses, and pyramid complexes, though on a smaller scale compared to the Old Kingdom. The pharaoh Amenemhat III is noted for his building projects, including the enlargement of the Fayum oasis to increase arable land. This project involved canal construction and water management systems, showcasing the state's capacity for large-scale engineering. The Middle Kingdom also faced external challenges, particularly from Nubian groups to the south and Asiatic peoples to the northeast. Military campaigns aimed to secure Egypt's borders and control strategic trade routes. Fortifications were built in the south, and diplomatic relations were maintained to manage interactions with neighboring territories. The period's social structure maintained traditional hierarchies, with the pharaoh at the apex, supported by a class of nobles, priests, and officials. However, there is evidence of increased social mobility as individuals from non-royal backgrounds attained positions of influence through service in the bureaucracy or military. Religion continued to be integral to state ideology. The cult of Ammon gained prominence in Thebes, aligning religious authority with political power. Temples served as economic centers and hubs of cultural activity, reinforcing the connection between the divine and the pharaoh's rule. The Middle Kingdom's stability and achievements established a model for future periods of Egyptian history. Its emphasis on balance, governance, administrative efficiency, and cultural patronage contributed to the long-term durability of the pharaonic system. This era ended around 1650 Year BCE with the onset of the Second Intermediate Period, characterized by renewed political fragmentation and the rise of foreign influence within Egypt. The New Kingdom represents the apex of ancient Egypt's political power, territorial expansion, and cultural influence, beginning around 1550 Year BCE. This period follows the reunification of Egypt after the Second Intermediate Period and the expulsion of foreign rulers, particularly the Hyksos, who had controlled parts of northern Egypt. The New Kingdom saw Egypt emerge as a formidable imperial power in the ancient Near East. The dynasty that initiated this era, the 18th dynasty, established Thebes as the political and religious capital. Pharaohs of this period expanded Egypt, as borders significantly through military campaigns into Nubia to the south and into regions of the Levant to the northeast. Control over these territories secured vital trade routes and access to resources such as gold, timber, and precious stones. Military innovation was a hallmark of the New Kingdom. The introduction of new weaponry, including composite bows and improved chariots, gave Egyptian forces a tactical advantage. Standing armies became more organized and professionalized compared to earlier periods, with units stationed in strategic border forts and garrisons. Key rulers of the New Kingdom include Ahmose I, who completed the expulsion of the Hyksos and reunified Egypt. Thutmose III, often described as a military strategist who expanded Egypt's empire to its greatest extent. Hatshepsut, notable for her extensive building projects and trade expeditions, and Ramses II, who is remembered for his long-reign monumental constructions and battles such as Kadesh. The New Kingdom also experienced significant developments in diplomacy. Treaties with neighboring states like the Hittites reflected Egypt's position as a major power. These diplomatic efforts helped stabilize borders and facilitated economic exchange. Religious practice during the New Kingdom was marked by the continued importance of traditional gods like Ammon, who rose in prominence as the chief deity of Thebes. The powerful priesthood of Ammon wielded considerable influence and controlled extensive temple estates. Royal patronage of temple building and religious festivals reinforced the link between pharaoh and divinity. Royal propaganda emphasized the pharaoh's role as both a warrior and a divine ruler. Inscriptions and monuments depicted military victories and divine endorsement, reinforcing legitimacy and authority across the kingdom and its territories. Economic activity was sustained by the administration's management of resources, labor, and trade. Large-scale construction projects, including temples, tombs, and urban centers, provided employment and stimulated the economy. Trade extended beyond Egypt's borders to regions such as Punt, the Levant, and Nubia, bringing exotic goods and wealth. The New Kingdom's art and architecture reflected its imperial ambitions and religious devotion. Temples such as Karnak and Luxor grew into expansive complexes adorned with reliefs and statues celebrating and pharaohs and gods. Royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings replaced the earlier pyramid form, emphasizing security and religious symbolism. Despite its power, the New Kingdom also faced internal challenges. The reign of Akhenaten introduced a significant religious reform that temporarily shifted worship to a single deity, the Aten. This reform met resistance and was reversed after Akhenaten's death, restoring traditional religious structures. The later part of the New Kingdom saw a gradual decline in centralized power, with increased influence of regional officials and priests. Economic difficulties, foreign invasions, and internal strife contributed to weakening royal authority. The period ended around 1070 year BCE, transitioning into the third intermediate period marked by political fragmentation. The New Kingdom remains a defining era of ancient Egyptian history, characterized by military expansion, cultural achievements, and the consolidation of pharaonic authority at its height. The reign of Akhenaten, originally named Amenhotep IV, stands as one of the most unique and carefully studied chapters in ancient Egyptian history. His rule lasted approximately from 1353 year BCE to 1336 year BCE during the 18th dynasty of the New Kingdom. Akhenaten's period is distinguished by sweeping religious reforms that challenged established traditions, marking a significant experiment in the relationship between royal authority and religious ideology. This episode offers insight into the limits of pharaonic power when confronted with entrenched institutional and cultural forces. Akhenaten succeeded his father Amenhotep III, a pharaoh whose reign was characterized by political stability, territorial expansion, and substantial building projects. Upon ascending the throne, Akhenaten initiated a dramatic shift by focusing worship on a single deity, the Aten. represented by the solar disk emitting rays that ended in hands. This emphasis represented a departure from Egypt's traditional polytheistic system, where multiple gods, including Ammon, Osiris, Isis, and others, were worshipped with extensive priesthoods and temples across the country. To formalize this religious transformation, the king changed his birth name Amenhotep IV to Akhenaten, which translates as effective for the Aten. He declared the Aten as the sole god deserving of worship, effectively establishing a form of monotheism or henotheism unprecedented in Egyptian history. This theological shift had both religious and political implications, as it aimed to concentrate religious authority in the hands of the pharaoh and diminish the power of the traditional priesthoods. Akhenaten relocated the capital from Thebes to a newly built city, Akhetaten, today known as Amarna, situated in Middle Egypt. This city was designed as the center for the Aten cult and rapidly constructed with temples, royal palaces, administrative buildings, and residential areas dedicated to the new religious order. The city's layout and architecture reflected the king's ideological vision, emphasizing open spaces and sunlight as symbolic of the Aten's life-giving power. Central to Akhenaten's reform was the systematic reduction of the Ammon priesthood's influence. The temples of Ammon, especially in Thebes, had grown wealthy and politically powerful, controlling vast estates and resources. Akhenaten's policies stripped these temples of their land and wealth, redirecting support toward Aten temples and clergy appointed directly by the royal administration. This shift challenged the entrenched religious establishment and disrupted long-standing economic and political networks. Artistic representations during Akhenaten's reign also departed significantly from traditional Egyptian styles. Reliefs and statues from Amarna depict the pharaoh and his family with elongated limbs, exaggerated facial features, and naturalistic poses. These images emphasize the divine connection between the king, his queen Nefertiti, and their children. Segment 11, the final pharaohs, Pharaoh dynasties c. 1070 year BCE, 30 year BCE, the period following the New Kingdom marked a significant transformation in Egypt's political landscape as the pharaonic system encountered internal challenges and increasing external influence. From approximately 1070 year BCE until the annexation of Egypt by Rome in 30 year BCE, the country was ruled by a series of dynasties that included native Egyptian rulers as well as foreign powers. This era illustrates both the resilience and adaptability of the pharaonic institution and its eventual decline in the face of foreign domination. After the decline of the New Kingdom around 1070 year BCE, Egypt entered what is known as the Third Intermediate Period. This era was characterized by political fragmentation and competing dynasties. The country was divided between local rulers and powerful priests, particularly those controlling the Temple of Ammon at Thebes in Upper Egypt. The high priests of Ammon exercised considerable religious and political power, sometimes rivaling the authority of the pharaohs in Lower Egypt. During this time, Egypt faced incursions and settlements by foreign groups, most notably the Libyans. The Libyan tribes gradually established themselves in the western Nile Delta and began to influence Egyptian politics. By the 22nd dynasty, which began around 945 year BCE, Libyan descended rulers had gained control of Egypt. These rulers maintained pharaonic traditions and adopted Egyptian religious practices, blending Libyan heritage with Egyptian royal ideology. Following the Libyan rule, Egypt saw a period of Nubian or Kushite dominance during the 25th dynasty c. 760 year BCE to 656 year BCE. Originating from the kingdom of Kush in present-day Sudan, these rulers extended their control over Egypt and sought to restore the country's past glory. The Nubian pharaohs undertook extensive building projects, revived traditional religious practices, and emphasized the role of the pharaoh as a divine ruler. Despite their efforts to reinforce pharaonic authority, the Nubian dynasty faced growing pressure from the expanding Assyrian Empire. Assyrian military campaigns in the 7th century year BCE pushed Nubian rulers out of Egypt and established Assyrian influence over the region. This period marked the first time Egypt was conquered by a Near Eastern empire, introducing new dynamics into the country's political environment. Following the Assyrian withdrawal, Egypt experienced a brief resurgence under native rulers during the late period. The 26th dynasty, known as the Sate dynasty, centered in the city of Sais. Promoted economic revival and cultural renaissance, these rulers attempted to restore Egypt's power by strengthening the military, fostering trade, and reaffirming religious traditions. However, Egypt's independence was increasingly challenged by the rise of the Persian Empire. In 525 year BCE, the Achaemenid Persians under Cambyses II conquered Egypt, incorporating it as a satrapy within their vast empire. Persian rule lasted intermittently until 400 year BCE, interrupted by brief periods of native revival. The Persians retained the pharaonic title and customs in an effort to legitimize their control, though their administration operated within the imperial framework. After the second period of Persian domination, Egypt regained short-lived independence under native rulers, but its strategic location made it a contested territory among emerging powers. The conquest of Alexander the Great in 330 year BCE marked a new chapter, Alexander's rival. He ended Persian control and initiated the Hellenistic period in Egypt. Following Alexander's death in 323 year BCE, his general Ptolemy established the Ptolemaic dynasty, which ruled Egypt until the Roman annexation in 30 year BCE. The Ptolemies maintained many aspects of Egyptian religion and governance. Presenting themselves as pharaohs to the native population, they built temples, supported priesthoods, and adopted Egyptian iconography while also promoting Greek culture and language. The Ptolemaic period was marked by political complexity and frequent dynastic struggles. The most famous of these rulers, Cleopatra VII, sought to preserve Egyptian sovereignty amid Roman expansion. Her alliances with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony reflect the shifting geopolitical realities of the time. Cleopatra's reign ended with the defeat of Antony and Cleopatra by Octavian, the future Emperor Augustus, and the formal incorporation of Egypt as a Roman province in 30 year BCE. This final transition marked the end of pharaonic rule as an independent institution, while Egyptian religious traditions and cultural practices persisted under Roman rule. The political system centered on the pharaoh was replaced by imperial administration, the legacy. The pharaohs continued to influence Egyptian identity and historical memory. But the era of native or foreign dynastic pharaohs concluded. Throughout this period of foreign dynasties, the institution of the pharaoh demonstrated adaptability by integrating diverse cultural influences while maintaining core elements of Egyptian kingship. However, the combined pressures of internal division, external conquest, and shifting imperial powers gradually eroded the autonomy and centralized authority they had. Characterized earlier periods. In summary, the centuries from approximately 1070 year BCE to 30 year BCE present a complex narrative of resilience, transformation, and eventual dissolution. The final pharaohs, whether of Libyan, Nubian, Persian, or Macedonian Greek origin, upheld the traditional role of the king as a divine ruler. Yet they also navigated the realities of foreign dominance and geopolitical change. This era underscores both the durability and the limitations of the pharaonic system as it transitioned toward its historical conclusion. The year 30 year BCE marks a significant turning point in the long history of ancient Egypt. This date signals the end of pharaonic rule, concluding a political and religious system that had endured for over 3 millennia. The cessation of Egypt as native dynastic monarchy came through the annexation of Egypt into the Roman Empire. Following a series of complex political events involving both internal and external powers, at the center of this transition was Cleopatra VII, the last reigning pharaoh of Egypt from the Ptolemaic dynasty, a Greek royal house that had ruled Egypt since the death of Alexander the Great and the establishment of the Hellenistic period in 323 year BCE. Cleopatra's reign spanned from 51 year BCE until her death in 30 year BCE. She was known for her political acumen, diplomatic skill, and efforts to preserve Egyptian independence amid the growing power struggles between realms. Leading figures. Cleopatra formed alliances with the prominent Roman leaders Julius Caesar and, later, Mark Antony. These alliances were both political and personal, aimed at securing military and economic support for Egypt after Julius Caesar's assassination in 44 Year BCE. Cleopatra aligned with Mark Antony, who was one of the three rulers of the Roman Republic following Caesar's death. The partnership between Cleopatra and Antony became a defining element of the late Ptolemaic period. The combined military and political efforts opposed the growing influence of Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir and eventual first Roman emperor Augustus. This rivalry culminated in the naval battle of Actium in 31 Year BCE, far off the western coast of Greece. Octavian's forces decisively defeated those of Antony and Cleopatra. Following their defeat, Antony and Cleopatra fled to Egypt in 30 Year BCE, facing the inevitability of Roman conquest. Both took their own lives, Antony by falling on his sword, Cleopatra reportedly by snakebite, though the precise details remain debated among historians. With Cleopatra's death, Egypt ceased to be an independent kingdom. Octavian annexed Egypt as a province of the Roman Empire. The Roman administration retained many aspects of Egyptian governance, but the pharaonic institution of centralized monarchy combining divine kingship and political power came to an end. The Ptolemaic royal lineage, the last of Egypt's pharaohs, had concluded. The annexation also marked the transformation of Egypt's religious landscape, while traditional Egyptian beliefs and temples continued. The role of the pharaoh as both political and religious leader was replaced by Roman imperial authority. The Roman emperors were regarded as the new rulers, administering Egypt through appointed governors, known as prefects. Egypt's incorporation into the Roman Empire had lasting consequences. The territory became a vital source of grain and resources for Rome. Contributing to the empire's sustenance and economic strength, Roman rule brought new architectural, administrative, and cultural influences, integrating Egypt more fully into the Mediterranean world. Despite the political end of pharaonic rule, Egypt's ancient cultural heritage persisted. Temples, monuments, and religious traditions continued, maintained by local priests and communities. Over centuries, Egyptian art, language, and religious concepts influenced Roman and later cultures, contributing to the broader historical legacy of the region. The conclusion of the pharaonic era in 30 Year BCE represents both an end and a transition. It ended one of history's longest continuous political and religious systems, while simultaneously setting the stage for Egypt's role within the Roman Empire and the changing dynamics of the ancient Mediterranean world. This moment reflects the resilience of Egyptian civilization even as its traditional institutions gave way to new forms of governance and external control.